Imagine a quiet residential flat on what was supposed to be just another ordinary night. But behind its locked doors, a story was about to unfold that would grip an entire nation for more than a decade. It's a case filled with dark secrets, swirling suspicion, and a desperate search for a truth that remains hidden.
So, let's go back to the night of May 15th, 2008. Inside this seemingly normal family home, there were four people, a family, and their live-in domestic worker. The doors were locked. The world outside had no idea of the horror that was about to be unleashed.
Because by the time the sun came up the next morning, only two of them would still be alive. And this is the story of the Aarushi Hemraj double murder, a case where the grieving parents would, unbelievably, become the prime suspects. Their journey would see them go from being convicted killers to acquitted individuals, leaving behind a chilling mystery that, honestly, still haunts us to this day.
So, to even begin to understand what might have happened, we really have to go back to the very beginning. We're going to reconstruct that night piece by piece and look at every angle of this fractured puzzle. Here's how we're going to break it all down.
All right, our story starts on the evening of May 15th, 2008, in a flat in Noida. And on the surface, everything was completely normal. It was a typical middle-class home, and the evening was just, a series of mundane everyday events. Inside, we have our four key players, Dr. Rajesh and Dr. Nupur Talwar, both successful dentists, their only child, the bright and bubbly 13-year-old Aarushi, and their live-in domestic worker, 45-year-old Hemraj. Four lives, you guys, unknowingly about to be shattered forever. So let's just walk through the timeline of that last evening. The parents get home from work. The family driver, who was the last outsider to see them, said everything seemed perfectly fine around 9:30 p.m. They even took some photos with a new camera for Arushi's birthday. A little later, her mom, Nupur, pops into a room to turn on the internet router. Just normal family stuff. And here's a detail that, in hindsight, is just unbelievably chilling. The last time her parents saw her alive, she was tucked in bed reading this book. Nobody in that flat could have possibly imagined that in just a few short hours, a bloody and horrific tragedy would tear their world apart. The peace of that night was completely shattered the next morning, and what followed was just a spiral of confusion, panic, and a truly shocking discovery. Now pay close attention here because the doors themselves become key characters in this mystery. The maid shows up and finds something really strange. The outer door is latched, but the inner door is locked from the outside. She can't get in. Nupur has to throw the keys down from the balcony. This simple sequence of events would be debated and picked apart for years. Once she was inside, the maid walked into a scene of absolute horror. 13-year-old Aarushi was lying lifeless in her bed. She had been murdered. Her throat was slit, and she had a severe head injury. Her body was partially covered by a blanket. In the middle of all the chaos and grief, one person was missing, the domestic worker, Hemraj. His room was empty, his phone wasn't reachable. And right there, in that moment, an immediate and, as it turns out, a devastatingly wrong conclusion was jumped to. The police show up and immediately latch onto this theory. Hemraj killed Aarushi and ran. And as this idea takes hold, friends, family, neighbors, everyone pours into this small apartment. In the process, the crime scene, the single most important source of evidence, is completely and irrevocably destroyed. And this quote pretty much sums up the single biggest failure of the initial investigation. The police noticed the door to the terrace was locked, but since they assumed Hemraj had fled, they just didn't bother to open it. That one decision was catastrophic. Because the very next day, a retired police officer who was visiting suggested they'd check the terrace. They finally forced the door open, and there, under the hot May sun, was the body of Hemraj. The man they thought was the killer was actually the second victim. I mean, the discovery of Hemraj's body changed everything. And when they looked at the postmortem reports, a really chilling pattern emerged. Both victims had suffered the exact same sequence of injuries, a powerful blow to the head, followed by a fatal, surgically precise cut to the throat. This pointed to one thing, a common killer. So with the killer-servant theory completely blown up, the investigation just shatters. The entire case now breaks down into three totally different, competing theories about what really happened behind those doors. Okay, so this slide lays it all out.
First, the theory that the parents did it. The argument was simple, right? 4 people in a locked apartment, 2 end up dead, no forced entry. The second theory pointed to Hemraj's friends, this so-called servant circle. The idea was they were drinking, tried to assault Aarushi, and then killed Hemraj to silence him. And the third theory? That some unknown outsider got in, committed the crimes, and vanished.
Now, that servant circle theory? The first team from the Central Bureau of Investigation, or CBI, was all in on it. They even got these so-called confessions using controversial narco tests. But here's the thing. Those tests aren't allowed as evidence in court. Plus, there was no solid forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, to tie these guys to the crime, and they all had alibis. The case against them just fell apart.
So with that theory dead in the water, a new CBI team takes over. And guess what? They turn their attention right back to the only 2 people left alive in that flat, Arushi's parents. And this is where things get really wild.
Look at this timeline. It shows the incredible legal roller coaster the Talwars went on. And get this, in a super bizarre twist, the CBI team investigating the parents actually tried to close the case. They said, look, we think they did it, but we just don't have enough evidence. But the judge rejected that and ordered the parents to stand trial based on that same report. It led to their conviction, which was then dramatically overturned 4 years later.
So to really get how they could be convicted and then acquitted, you have to understand this key idea: circumstantial evidence. There was no murder weapon, no confession, no eyewitness. The prosecution had to build this perfect, unbroken chain of circumstances that pointed only to the parents and nowhere else.
And this is what's so fascinating. You have 2 different courts looking at the exact same evidence, and they come to completely opposite conclusions. The trial court said, yep, the chain is complete, it points straight to the parents. But the high court looked at it and said, nope, this chain is full of weak links and missing pieces. Okay, so after a decade of investigations, a crazy media circus, and dramatic court battles, where does that leave us? Let's boil it all down to what we can actually say for certain versus what we still just don't know. These are the cold, hard, undisputed facts of the case. We know how they were killed, we know the investigation was completely botched from the get-go, and most importantly, after all this time, there's still no murder weapon and not a single piece of direct forensic evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints, that definitively links anyone, neither the parents nor the servants, to the murders.
And that brings us to the fundamental question, right? You can have a whole lot of circumstances and suspicions, but is that enough? Is it enough to meet that high legal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
The High Court's answer was a loud and clear no. They said the chain of evidence was just too weak, too full of holes. They basically said that suspicion, no matter how strong, can't replace actual proof. And when there are 2 possible interpretations, the law says you have to choose the one that favors the accused. It's called giving the benefit of the doubt. And so the Talwars walked free. But, and this is so important, this wasn't the court saying they are innocent. It was the court saying the prosecution failed to prove they were guilty. The sad reality is that the system failed. It failed the victims, and it failed to give us a real answer. Officially, the killer of Aarushi and Hemraj is still out there. So, after going through the timeline, the botched investigation, the 3 competing theories, and the conflicting court rulings, we are left with the exact same question that has haunted a nation for over a decade. Who did it? So what is your opinion? What do you think really happened inside that flat on that night in May? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed deep dives into fascinating and complex stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more. Thanks for watching.